Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, top of the page, second line. The Koirei Achrei Mois Ve'achba Aser. So we learned that the Kohen Gadol, when he reads from the Torah, he reads two readings. He reads Achrei Mois and he reads Achba Aser. So, I will ask you a kasha from a Braise, or maybe it's a Mishnah. It says Medalgin Benavi vein Medalgin B'Torah. You can skip around in the half Torah when you read from the Navi. You can skip around, but you cannot skip around in the Torah. So here he's skipping around. He's reading Achrei Mois, and then suddenly he switches over to Parshas Emer. Can't do that. Amar Abaye like Kashas Abaye said, there's no contradiction. Kan b'chdei yifsek haturgeman, kan b'chdei yifsek haturgeman. Question is, we said before that at the time of the Gemara, the Seder was they used to read from the Torah, and right after the reading from the Torah, right after a pasuk was read from the Torah, it was translated into Aramaic. So if you have a situation where in the time that it takes you to translate the pasuk into Aramaic, during that time the Balkeda can quickly roll the Torah a few columns and come to the new reading, then that is okay. But thank you very much. If it's going to take longer than that, then that's what the Mishnah in Megillah refers to when it says Ein Medalgin the Torah. You can't make the Olam wait until you're Geilo. But if you can do it within the time that the Metargim says the Targum, then it's fine. But didn't we learn a Braise adjacent to this Mishnah? Medalgin the Navi, Ein Medalgin the Torah. That when we say that you can skip around in the Nevi'im, but you can't skip around in Torah about Kama Medalgin, how much can you skip around in the Navi? Ad Kadesh Yifsek HaTurgeman. You can only skip around in the Navi enough time to give you time that while the Aramaic translation is being read out, you can quickly shift a few columns into where you want to read from after that. Miklal, which seems to imply the B'Torah Klal Klal, that in Torah you can't skip it at all. Elamar Abaye like Kashas. Abaye said there's no contradiction. When it says that you cannot skip around in Torah, it's talking about when you're reading about two different subjects. But if the two readings that you're skipping in from one to the other are both talking about the same subject, then it's permissible. And over here, Achrei Mois speaks about Yom Kippur, and Achba Aser speaks about Yom Kippur. So since it's in the same subject, it's permissible. The Hatanya, and this is what it says in the Braise, Medalgin b'Torah b'inyan echad b'navi b'shnei inyanim. You can skip around in Torah if it's the same subject. In Navi, you can skip around even if it's two different subjects. In both cases, it's only if you have enough time that you should be able to do the rolling while the Aramaic translation is being read out. And as soon as the Aramaic translation is done, you're able to continue. So both in Torah and in Navi, you're only allowed to skip around. In Torah, if it's the same subject, and in Navi, even if it's a different subject, only in the circumstances where you have enough time to do so before the Aramaic translation is completed. Ein medalgin mi Navi leNavi, but we never skip from one Navi to another. The Navi shal shnei masar medalgin, in the Navi of Todei Asar, there's the 12 Nevi'im, the 12 minor Nevi'im that are bunched together in the Todei Asar. So there you can skip around from one to the other. As long as you don't go from the end of the Sefer back to the beginning of the Sefer. My son Matel is here, and his bar mitzvah pilpul was on this subject. His bar mitzvah was Shabbos Chanukah Rosh Chodesh, and there's the whole discussion about whether you can. Our minig is that Shabbos Chanukah Rosh Chodesh we read the Haftarah of Shabbos Chanukah, and then we also read a few psukim from the Haftarah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. And the question and Machar Chodesh as well, because when Shabbos Chanukah is Rosh Chodesh is Shabbos and Sunday. Now the problem is that Machar Chodesh is from Shmuel. And the Kriya of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh is from Yeshaya, and the Kriya of Chanukah is from Zechariah. Shabbos Chanukah is from Zechariah. So the question is, how can you be medalek mi Navi leNavi? And this was the whole discussion based on the Sikh of the Rebbe on this subject. Then it says that he rolls up the Sefer Torah manicha b'cheikoi, and he places it in his basam, and he says that more than I've read to you is written here. And then he reads the Kriya from Parshas Pinchas about the Karban Musaf. He says it Baal Peh. Why does he need to say more than is read to you is written here? Not to give out a bad name on the Sefer Torah, because if the Kohen Gadol He's going to roll up the Sefer Torah and say the next part I'm going to read by heart. So what's it going to look like? It's going to look like this Sefer Torah is missing a few pages. That's why I have to read some parts by heart. So in order not to give out a laz on the Sefer Torah, he says to them, you should know that more than I've read to you is written here, and what I'm going to read to you Baal Peh is also written here. But for reasons that we're not going to go into right now, I'm going to read it to you Baal Peh rather than read it to you from the Sefer. The reason being is you can't be Geil the Sefer Torah in public. Then it says that the Parsha Ba'aser in Chumash Bamidbar in Pinchas, he reads Baal Peh. Why can't he roll the Sefer Torah to Pinchas and read from the Sefer Torah? Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Sheshes, and Rav Huna bar Yehuda is the name of Rav Sheshes, Vishen Gedolim Sefer Torah b'tzibur, because you don't roll a Sefer Torah in public. You don't keep the tzibur waiting while you're rolling the Sefer Torah from one parsha to another. So Emer, which is only a short while away from Achrei Mos, you can roll that quickly while the Matargum is saying the Targum of the Pasuk. But to roll all the way to Pinchas is going to take time. And you're not allowed to do that while the tzibur is waiting. So why don't you take out another Sefer Torah? Right? You can have two Sefer Torah. One Sefer Torah you should read from Achrei Mos, and the second Sefer Torah he should read from Chemesh Apkudim, from Pinchas. Rav Huna bar Yehuda said the reason is we should pug gamay shel rishon, because if you're going to roll up one Sefer Torah, excuse me, and then take out another Sefer Torah, it's going to give the impression that the first Sefer Torah is possible. That's why you're rolling up the first Sefer Torah and taking out another Sefer Torah, and you don't want to put a suggestion on a Sefer Torah that is possible. Rav Shimon ben Lakish gives another reason, because you're not going to make an unnecessary bracha. If he would roll up the Sefer Torah and take out another Sefer Torah, he would have to make a bracha achreina on the first Sefer Torah, and then make again a bracha rishayna on the second Sefer Torah, and that would be a bracha she'eina tzricha. So you don't make a bracha she'eina tzricha. Are we worried about making a suggestion that the Sefer Torah is possible? The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka, didn't Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka say that Shchedesh Tevis Chali is b'Shabbos, as we mentioned before? If Shchedesh Tevis falls on Shabbos, it's always the middle of Chanukah. Maybe Shalosh Tevis, you bring three Sefer Torah. The first Sefer Torah you lay from the Seder. The Achas Shalosh Shchedesh, and the second Sefer Torah you lay in the reading of the Shchedesh. The Achas B'Shal Chanukah, and the third Sefer Torah you read the reading of Chanukah. So you see that you can take out three Sefer Torah, and it's fine to roll up one Sefer Torah and take out another, and then roll up the second and take out a third, and we're not worried about giving out a bad name on the Sefer Torah. And for the Gemara, plus a Gavra, plus a Sifra, you call up three different people to the Torah and three different Sifra Torah. In other words, the person who was called for Shishi, let's say, in the first Sefer Torah, he makes a bracha achreina, we roll up the Sefer Torah, and then we call Ya'amoid somebody else for Shvi. So that's not a problem to read that from another Sefer Torah. You read for the first person from this Sefer Torah, from the second person from that Sefer Torah. But Chad Gavra v'trei Sifra, for the same Oila, for the same person having the aliyah, to suddenly in the middle of an aliyah roll up the Sefer Torah, they got another Sefer Torah, the only time you do that is when a Sefer Torah is possible. So you could begama, that would give out a negative impression on the Sefer Torah. So since over here the Kohen Gadol is the one who does all the readings, he's the Oila, so in the middle of his aliyah, you cannot switch Sefer Torah. Then it says in the Mishnah, Mevarach Aleh Shmeina brachas. And after this reading, he makes 8 brachas. The Rabbanon learned the Braisa. What are the 8 brachas? Mevarchin ala Torah, k'derech shemevarchin bebeis hakneses. So the bracha ala Torah, asher nasan lanu Torah emes v'chayi elam nata v'seichenu is the same bracha that we make in Shul. Yal ha'aveda, and then we make a bracha ala ha'aveda, asking Hashem that the aveda and the Beis Hamikdash should be accepted and should continue. And then we give a bracha of meidim, of thanks. Al mechilas ha'avayin. Then we make the bracha of Mechilas Ha'Avein, which is the bracha of B'chayil Avein Yiseinu B'Yom HaKippurim Hazeh. And we say in Shemon Esrei, he says over here after the reading, Al HaMikdash B'fnei Atzmei. Then there's a specific bracha for the Beis HaMikdash to fulfill its purpose and last. Al HaKayanim B'fnei Atzmei, a special bracha for the Kayanim. Al Yisrael B'fnei Atzmei, a special bracha for the Yidden. Al Yerushalayim B'fnei Atzmei, a special bracha for Yerushalayim. And it says V'Hashar Tefillah. On the Rabbanon learned the Braisa, Hashar Tefillah Tchina Rino Bakasha. The rest is a prayer, a beseeching, song, singing, and begging. Sha'amcha Yisrael Tzichim Libasha. You didn't need a Yeshua. You didn't need to be helped. The Chesem Shemei Tefillah, and you finish that bracha Baruch Ta Hashem Shemei Tefillah. The Kan ve'elach from here onward, so everybody brings it safe after the Kohen Gadol finishes his reading with his brachas, and everybody brings their own Sefer Torah from their house, and reads from his own Sefer Torah. What's the point of doing that? They already heard Kriyas HaTorah from the Kohen Gadol. Why does everybody have to bring their own Sefer Torah and read again from their own Sefer Torah?
When it says they bring from their house to the Beis Hamikdash.
We're going to deal with that in 1 second. Why do they need to bring a Sefer Torah of their own? To show the beauty of the Sefer Torah to everybody, because the mitzvah has to be beautiful. So the fact that everybody brings their Sefer Torah to Beis Hamikdash and reads from it is an opportunity for everybody to be inspired by the beauty of the mitzvah, of how beautiful everybody's Sefer Torah is. Now, Rabbi Rodel asks a question. It's Yom Kippur. You're not allowed to carry on Yom Kippur. How could they bring their Sefer Torah from their house to shul? So Rashi picks up this question, and Rashi says two possible answers. One possible answer is that there is an opinion that holds that Ein Eidov Eitzah L'Yom Kippur. There's an opinion that holds that you're allowed to carry on Yom Kippur like any other Yom Tov. So maybe our Mishnah goes according to that. Maybe this Braisa goes according to that opinion that you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov. Or perhaps Inam Yerushalayim Dalsei Se'an Ulis Balayla. Yerushalayim has walls, and the doors of Yerushalayim, the gates of Yerushalayim, are locked at night. And the din is that if you have a city that has surrounded by a wall and the gates are locked at night, Ma'arvin Eskula, you can make an Eidav. Even in a city, you can make an Eidav in the entire city.
As regards the first explanation, Rashi, it doesn't say Shabbat Shabbaton, so it gives the inference that is Shabbos.
There is a machlekes of Tanoim exactly legabe what it is Shabbos. Yom Tov is also called Shabbos. We rest certain malachas on Yom Tov. The question is if Yom Kippur has the same malachas as Shabbos or has the same malachas as Yom Tov. So that is a machlekes of Tanoim. We pass Yom Kippur has the same malachas as Shabbos. So halacha, you're surely not allowed to carry Yom Kippur. No question about it. But there is an opinion that has, and perhaps the Tana of this Braisa is in accordance with that opinion.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Says the Mishnah. Parshas HaMelech Ketzad. One of the things that we learned has to be recited Dafke Lashon Kodesh is Parshas HaMelech. Parshas HaMelech is when the king reads from the Sefer Torah for the all of Klal Yisrael on Hakel. So how exactly is this performed? So the Mishnah says, Meitzah Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, at the end of the first day Yom Tov of Sukkot, B'Shmini in the 8th year, Meitzah Shviyas at the end of the 7th year of Shemitah, Eisen Lei Bima Shel Eitz Ba'Zara, a special platform of wood is built in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash for the Kohen, for the Melech, upon which the king sits. As it says in the pasuk, at the end of 7 years, the Yom Tov of Sukkot, this is what is done. How does it happen actually? This Chazan HaKnesses Neitel Sefer Torah. The Chazan HaKnesses, who we said was the form of a shamash, takes the Sefer Torah, the Neis the Reish HaKnesses, he gives it to the Reish HaKnesses, who's like the Gabbai, who gives out the aliyas and gives out all the kibbudim of the Beis Hamikdash. The Reish HaKnesses Neis no Lizgan. The Reish HaKnesses gives it to assistant Kohen Gadol. The Azgan Neis no Kohen Gadol, and the assistant Kohen Gadol passes it to the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol Neis no Melech, and the Kohen Gadol hands it to the king. The Melech Eimed Makabel, and then the king stands up to receive the Sefer Torah. V'keira Yeshiv and reads while sitting. Agrifas HaMelech was a king from the descendants of the Hashmonaim dynasty. And actually, there's a whole issue about the Hashmonaim dynasty. It's not so simple because there's a story that the servants of the Hashmonaim basically took over their dynasty. And a servant is not really a full-fledged Jew and definitely doesn't have Jewish lineage. So the question is whether their kingship was 100% legitimate. In any case, Agrifas was the king, and he Amad v'kibel v'kara Eimed. He stood up to take the Sefer Torah, and then he read from it standing. V'shabchu chachamim, and the chachamim praised him for the fact that he read from the Sefer Torah standing rather than sitting as is normally done. When he got to the pasuk which says you're not allowed to take a foreigner, a stranger who's not from Jewish lineage, and place him as your king, so go ein of the mois. So his eyes were tearing. There were tears flowing from his eyes because he knew that this pasuk questions the legitimacy of his kingship. Amrulai, so the Yidden said to him, Al tisyare agrifas, don't worry, agrifas, don't be fearful. Achinu ata, you're our brother, you're our brother. We consider you one of ours, and we accept you as a legitimate king. Don't worry. The Melech reads from the beginning of Chumash Dvarim until Shema Yisrael, Shema, and then he reads the parsha of Shema. V'hayim Shameya, skips over to V'hayim Shameya, which is in Akev. Then he reads Aser to Aser, Ki Techalel Aser, Parshas HaMelech, the parsha in Parsha Shoftim, which talks about the mitzvah of appointing a Melech, Ubrachis Uklolus, and then the Brachas and Klolus, which are in Parshas Ki Savoi, Hatshagaber Kol HaParsha, until he finishes the entire parsha. Brachas Kain Gadol Mevarach Esam, the same brachas that we just said before, which the Kain Gadol says after the reading. Hamelech Mevarach Esam, the king makes the same brachas. Instead of one of the brachas that we said, the Kain Gadol says is the bracha of Mechilas Ha'avin. Obviously, when the king reads in the Sefer Torah, it's not Yom Kippur, it's Sukkot. So instead of setting the bracha of Mechilas Ha'avin, he replaces that with this bracha for Sukkot. Kaddish Yisrael Vazmanim. Fragt die Gemara. Bishmini sal kadaitach. The Mishnah said that Meitzah Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Bishmini. Shmini seems to make the impression on the 8th day. Now we just said that it's at the end of the first day. So it can't be on the 8th day. So what does it mean, B'Shmini Shal Kadai? How could you have thought it should be on the 8th day? Ema B'Shminis. Should correct the Mishnah, not B'Shmini on the 8th day, but B'Shminis in the 8th year. Shana is Lashon Nekeva. Yom is Lashon Zachar. Shana is Lashon Nekeva. Chalhani Lamali. Why do we have to give all these identification marks? That it's the end of this. It's on the 8th year, the end of the Shemitah year, on Sukkot. Tzrichi, we need all these identification marks.
On Sukkot is telling us when it was. The question is only why it needs to say Bashmini and B'Mitzvah Shvius.
No, the question is, I gave it wrong. The question is on the pasuk. It says Miketz Sheva Shana B'Mayit Shnas Hashmita B'Chag HaSukkos. Because of Rachmana Miketz, if it would have just said at the end, Havamina Nimna Mahashta, you would think, what, at the end of 7 years, start counting. At the end of 7 years, you make Hakel. Even though it doesn't come out at the end of a Shemitah. Because of Rachmana Shemitah. Therefore, it says Shemitah. Because of Rachmana, it has to be at the end of Shemitah. Because of Rachmana Shemitah, if the Torah would have just written the end of Shemitah and would not have said it at the end of 7 years, Havamina of a safe Shemitah, I would have thought that you do it right at the end of Shemitah. Because of Rachmana B'Mayid. Therefore, the Torah writes B'Mayid, it has to be on a Yom. Because of B'Mayid, if it just would have said B'Mayid, Havamina Minei Shata, I would thought maybe Rosh Hashanah is also Yom. Maybe you should have the Haka on Rosh Hashanah. So therefore it says on Chag HaSukkos. Because of Rachmana b'Chag HaSukkos, Havamina fil Yom Tov Achrim. If it just would have said the Chag HaSukkos, I would have thought it could even be the last day of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres. Because of Rachmana b'Vei Kol Yisrael. So it says b'Vei Kol Yisrael, when Yidden originally come, me'aschalta d'mayid, from the very beginning of the Yom Tov. So it appears that in Torah, it should have actually been on Yom Tov itself. Now because the Chachamim were concerned about the building of the Bima on Yom Tov, they postponed it for Meitzah Yom Tov. In a case where the second day of Sukkot falls on Shabbos, they postponed it another day. And then we learned that the Chazan HaKnesses takes the Sefer Torah and passes it to the Reish HaKnesses. Correct the Gemara, the same question we had in the previous Gemara. Does this not teach us that you give respect to a lesser degree of cheshivas in the presence of someone with a higher degree of cheshivas? The king is standing here. And you have time to start giving out kavod to the Chazan HaKnesses and the Reish HaKnesses and the Sgan and the Kohen Gadol, right? Doesn't this teach us that Chelk and Kavod l'Talmud Makam HaRab, that it's appropriate to give respect to the Talmud in the presence of the Rab? Amar Abaye said, no, we're not trying to honor these different people over here. Kulei mishum kvedid the Melech, the whole parade over here of giving it to this one and passing it to that one, etc., is only to give greater honor to the Melech. There's a whole procedure in the Sefer Torah reaching the Melech. The king stands up to receive the Sefer Torah, and then he sits down to read. Agrifas HaMelech Amad, King Agrifas stood throughout Amad the Kibel. He stood up to receive the Sefer Torah. The Kara Eimed, and he read the whole reading while standing up. From the fact that it says that the king rises to receive the Sefer Torah, that seems to imply that until then he was sitting. Didn't we learn in Yeshiva Bazar Malcha Beis David Bilbad that only the kings of the house of David can sit in the Azara? Agrifas surely was not from the house of David. And as it says in the pasuk, so it's a special privilege for David HaMelech and his descendants, and they can sit in the presence of the Eibishter in the Azara. Otherwise, nobody's allowed to sit in the Azara. So how could you say that Agrifas stood up to receive the Sefer Torah? He was not allowed to sit to begin with. And for the Gemara, just like we had in the previous Gemara, we said Rav Chisda said that when it says the Azara, it doesn't mean the inner courtyard where the Mizbeach is. It means the women's courtyard. Here also by the Melech, you could say that the reading of the Hakel does not take place in the Azara, it takes place in Ezras Nashim.
Why are we repeating the whole Gemara?
I don't know. It's very possible that this Gemara was learned in one setting, and that Gemara was learned in another setting, not by the same people. Shibchu Chachamim, the Chachamim praised him for standing. If they praised him, that seems to imply that he did the right thing by standing. Didn't Rav Ashi say that even the opinion who holds that it says that a Talmud Chacham, if he's meichel on his kavod is machel. It's okay. But a nasi, a leader of Klal Yisrael, if he's meichel on his kavod, it's not so simple. Not everybody agrees that it's okay. But even the opinion that says that a nasi that is meichel on his kavod is acceptable, everybody agrees that a king cannot be meichel on his kavod. You should place upon yourself a king, which means his fear should be upon you. And if a king is meichel on his kavod, he lets himself be treated like a commoner, that decreases the fear of the king. So it goes against the Torah. Says the Gemara, so how was Agrifas able to forgo on his kavod and stand when he was supposed to be sitting? And for the Gemara, mitzvah shiny. A king should never forgo on his kavod except when it comes to a mitzvah. When it comes to a mitzvah to show honor to Hashem and to his mitzvahs, that's an exception. So therefore, since over here we're showing honor to the Torah, it was no problem with him being meichel on his kavod. When he came to the pasuk, you're not allowed to appoint a king who was from a foreign lineage, and he started his eyes started dripping tears. That's the Gemara. Tanamish made it of Nasan. We learned in a Braisa in the name of Reb Nasan. And he saw Kloya. At that moment, that the Jewish people encouraged Agrifas, and they said, "You're our brother. You're our brother." At that moment, the Jewish people deserved destruction. Shechnifu leila Agrifas, because they chanfed Agrifas, they buttered him up in an inappropriate situation. Amar Rav Shimon ben Chalafta. Rav Shimon ben Chalafta said, "Miyem shegaber Agreifa shel Chanufa." From the day that the fist of Chanifa means giving people compliments in inappropriate circumstances. And from the day that Chanifa became powerful, Nisavsu Hadinim, the laws became blinded, and what's the Aleph is Hadayanim. Girs Rashi Hadayanim. When and people's deeds became ruined, nobody can say to his friend, "My deeds are better than your deeds," because everybody's in trouble. Rabbi Yehuda taught, and some people say Rav Shimon ben Pazi taught, it's permissible to chanfa a rasha, to give praises that are not necessarily 100% honest, not sincere, to a rasha in this world. Shanamar, as it says, that Mashiach will come, they're no longer going to call disgusting people generous. We're not going to call them, we're not going to say to stingy people that they are spendthrifty. So since this is a prophecy of the future, that in the future we're not going to have to say dishonest things about people to make them feel good when they're in power, is a siman that nowadays it's permissible. Rav Shimon ben Lakish says, we learn this from here. It says in the pasuk that Yaakov said to Esav that I'm very privileged to see your face. It's like seeing the countenance of Hashem. And you will surely take a good approach to me. You'll be desirable to me. So we see that Yaakov buttered up Esav in an insincere way, told him things that weren't true. And it was okay. And this agrees with Reb Levi. Reb Levi says, what is the story of Yaakov and Esav? Yaakov said to Esav that what a pleasure it is to see you. What is this comparable to? Why did he tell him that seeing you is kereis pnei elikim, like seeing God, or at least a malach that represents God. So the story goes as follows. Adam shazimin es chavere, the mashal of a person who invited his friend, and he noticed that the friend wants to kill him. Amar loi, so the guest who feels that his life is being threatened turns to the host and says, I want to compliment the food that I'm eating over here. It's so tasty. It tastes like the food that I ate in the royal palace when I was the king's guest. I ate this kind of food that tasted like this. Omar, so the host starts to think, this guy knows the king. Mistafis, he gets afraid, and he refrains from killing him. So the same way Esav said to Yaakov said to Esav, it's such a pleasure to see you like it was when I met your malach. So that Esav should realize that Yaakov is tough stuff. He deals with malachim and sometimes is victorious against malachim. So you don't start up with guys that can knock down malachim. Amar Rabbi Elazar said, people that give dishonest compliments bring wrath to the world. So chanfe comes from the word chanifa. Yasimu af will bring wrath. Not only that, their tefillas won't be heard. So Yeshavu is crying out to Hashem in prayer. Simen af uber gehenim biyadei gida geila. Nido geila. This is a simonim of this last Gemara with Yosimu af, and then the Gemaras will come afterwards. Another thing Rabbi Elazar said, anyone who has this dishonest complimenting, even fetuses in their mother's wombs curse him. As it says, one who says to a wicked person, you are righteous, the nations will curse him, and the powers will say not nice things about him. Means they'll curse him. As it says by Bilam, how can I curse him? Hashem didn't curse. And Lu'um refers to fetuses. When Yaakov and Esav were in Rivka's womb, she was told that each of these powers will struggle against each other. So since the word Lu'im was used to describe Yaakov and Esav while there was still fetuses in their mother's womb, so we understand that the word Lu'im refers to a fetus, and therefore when it says it means that even fetuses curse him. Another thing Rabbi Elazar said, a person that has chanufa, which is dishonest, gives dishonest compliments, will fall in Gehenna. As it says, those that say to that which is bad, they call it good, and that which is good, they call bad. What does it say afterwards? So it's a description of the fire of Gehenna. Another thing Rabbi Elazar said, someone who gives dishonest compliments to his chaver, will eventually fall in his chaver's hands. He's trying to butter up the other guy so he doesn't have to suffer from him. Eventually he will fall in his hands. If he doesn't fall in his hands, he will fall in his children's hands. Doesn't fall in his children's hands, he'll fall in his grandson's hands. As it says, Yirmiyah said to Hananiah was a false prophet. Yirmiyah said to Hananiah, Amen, Ken Yasa Hashem, Yakim Hashem es Barecha, may Hashem do as you say, may Hashem fulfill your words. So he was, instead of saying to Hananiah ben Azir, you're a liar, you're a fraud, he said, Amen, Hashem should fulfill your words. And it says, Vahiyu Bashar ben Yamin, he was in the gate of Ben Yamin Misham Bal Pkidis. There was an officer there, Shmei Yereya ben Shlemya ben Hananiah, who obviously was a grandson of his Hananiah, who Yirmiyah had complimented. Yitbeis is Yirmiyahu Anavi Lamer, and he grabbed Yirmiyahu Anavi and said to him, Elakazdim Atonefo, you're going to fall to the Babylonians. Yemer Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu said to him, Sheker, it's false. And then he nefel Elakazdim, I'm not going to fall to the Babylonians. And it says, Vayitbeis al Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu grabbed hold of Yirmiyah, and he brought him to the ministers. So we see that Yirmiyahu, after he was buttering up Hananiah ben Azir, he ended up falling into the hands of his grandson Yereya ben Shlemya ben Hananiah.
Is this Chanufa schmoozing? Is this the same thing?
I don't know what you mean by schmoozing. Chanufa means giving people compliments in order to get on their good side. when their compliments are really not, they're not to the zach. The person is really not a good person.
Okay, but is it like saying to someone who's a Rosh, oh, you're a tzaddik, or someone who doesn't have the nicest voice, and you say, wow, you sounded wonderful, or you look really good?
I mean, I guess if it's there's room for stretching it, then you can say compared to what it could have been, it's good. But if the person's doing clearly something wrong, and you're complimenting him, then you're
encouraging it.
I'm only guessing.
Thank you.
But that has to be something wrong. If it's something that's not necessarily wrong, like the examples that Rodel gave, then it should be okay.
I would think so. But it has to be have episode is not supposed to say lies.
That's what we say to every kala nova chasudo, you know.
Because she's be'etzim not called nova chasudo, but nice Yisrael no you say. That's the machlekes be'shamay be'silus. Whether you look at the etzim or you look at the spashtus, you look at the gilu, you look at the etzim. You know, they say that there's the ongoing machlekes between the mother and the principal. The principal phones up the mother and says, your child is a terror. He's bringing down the school. You have to come and take him home. And the mother says, my tatala, he's such a sweet boy. What are you talking about? So who's right, the principal or the mother? They're both right. The principal's talking about his behavior, and the mother's talking about what he is in essence. How Chasuda means in essence everything is Noah Chasuda. And Beishamai says, Aber B'Poel Mamish.
Thank you, like that.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we did finish, yeah.